Our next chapter. What are general principles of law and equity? These represent the principles of law that are recognized by civilized nations. So general principles are used oftentimes in terms of procedural questions, whether in court or whether in an arbitration. And we'll cover both of those in detail when we get to dispute resolution. But general principles are often used for procedural items, not substantive items in terms of what is the law, but in terms of procedure. How should this dispute be resolved? So that's where we see these gap fillers come into place, because oftentimes treaties and custom are going to be much broader and will not cover things like procedure. So we use them as gap fillers, but we also can use them as gap fillers in treaties where the treaty is not precise enough. Then we can rely on general principles of the law to interpret the treaty. General principles often reflect basic human rights, what we call fundamental human rights. And so when you hear general principles, oftentimes we're talking about fundamental human rights, things like property rights, things like religious rights, a right to privacy. These are rights that are common across legal systems, not simply a feature of United States law or French law or UK law, but these are the types of principles that are applicable everywhere. Lawyer-client privilege. You probably don't think about that as a fundamental human right, but the idea that a lawyer should be able to talk to his client without that information becoming public, that is a belief that's held across the world. So that's an idea, that's an example of a general principle of the law. Due process. You often hear about due process in the United States. It's an Anglo-American concept. It came out of British law and American law. And what due process is that everyone should be entitled to certain procedures. It doesn't mean that it's you have a 50-50 chance of winning. It simply says that there must be rules and the government must follow those rules. That's what due process is. Due process, generally we think of it as having two aspects, which is to say notice. You must have a notice of official governmental notice of a breach of law or a breach of a contract, and an opportunity to be heard. So due process says that if you parked illegally, you have to get official notice, you have violated this particular statute, and you have to be given an opportunity to be heard by a court, by an arbitrator. It doesn't mean you're going to win. It doesn't mean that there's even a 50-50 chance you're going to win. It just means that if there are rules, they must be followed. So I often tell people that when we think about due process, think of it as a synonym for follow the rules. Have rules and follow them. Non-retroactivity is another concept that we find across country borders, which is to say that when a law is passed, it should not make an activity that was legal illegal. We can't go back in time and enforce the law if that wasn't the law at the time of the act. Non-retroactivity. Legal review refers to the ability to appeal an adverse decision. The idea that another court should be able to look at a lower court's decision.